The dust-choked horizon melted into fiery hues as Grace Turner stumbled down the road to Yerington, Nevada, clutching the remnants of her once fine dress to her body. Blood trickled from a cut above her eyebrow, mingling with tears that carved clean lines through the dirt on her face. Behind her lay the smoldering ruins of the stagecoach that had been attacked by bandits just miles outside of town, and the bodies of her traveling companions who hadn't survived. The year was 1876, and Grace had lost everything in a matter of minutes. Her trunk containing all her worldly possessions was gone, taken by the outlaws who'd left her for dead. All that remained was the torn blue calico dress on her back, a single pearl hairpin hidden in her auburn tresses, and the wedding band from her recently deceased husband that she'd managed to hide in her mouth during the robbery. As she approached the outskirts of Yerington, her vision began to blur. The small mining town wavered like a mirage in the distance. The last thing Grace remembered before collapsing was the thunder of hoofbeats and the silhouette of a man on horseback racing toward her. When she awoke, Grace found herself in an unfamiliar bed, sunlight streaming through faded gingham curtains. The room was small but tidy, with simple wooden furniture and a woven rug covering the plank floor. As she struggled to sit up, a deep voice spoke from the doorway. "Easy there, madam. You've had quite an ordeal." Grace turned to see a tall man leaning against the doorframe. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with kind eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt, worn denim pants, and suspenders, but carried himself with quiet dignity. "Where am I?" she managed, her throat parched. "My ranch, just outside Yerington," he said, stepping into the room with a cup of water. "Name's Ryder Jenkins. Found you collapsed on the road yesterday evening." He handed her the cup, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Thank you," Grace whispered, taking a small sip. "I'm Grace Turner. There was an attack on the stagecoach. Everyone else, they didn't." "I know," Ryder said gently. "Sheriff Palmer rode out there after I brought you in. They found the site." He hesitated before adding, "They recovered the bodies for proper burial, but the bandits took everything of value." Grace closed her eyes as fresh grief washed over her. She hadn't known her fellow passengers well, but they'd been kind to her during the journey. "I've got nothing left," she said, more to herself than to him. "Everything I owned was in that trunk. I was coming to Yerington to start over after my husband died." She looked down at her torn dress, suddenly painfully aware of her appearance. "I don't even have proper clothes." Ryder's expression remained steady, his voice soft but firm. "You've got your life, Mrs. Turner, and from where I'm standing, that makes you wealthy enough for me." Something about his words, so simple yet profound, broke through the shock that had numbed Grace since the attack. She began to sob, deep, wrenching cries that seemed to come from the very core of her being. Without hesitation, Ryder sat beside her and awkwardly patted her shoulder, offering quiet comfort until the storm passed. "I'm sorry," Grace said finally, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "No need to apologize for feeling," Ryder replied. He stood and moved toward the door. "Mrs. Holloway from town brought over some clothes for you. They're in that chest there. Once you're dressed, come on out to the kitchen. You need to eat something." After he left, Grace slowly made her way to the chest and found several simple but well-made dresses, undergarments, and a pair of sturdy boots. They were plain compared to what she'd once worn as the wife of a successful merchant in San Francisco, but they were clean and whole. She chose a green cotton dress that was only slightly too large and carefully combed her hair with the wooden comb provided, securing it with her pearl hairpin. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Ryder at the stove, stirring something that smelled wonderful. The kitchen was modest but spotless, with bunches of herbs hanging from the rafters and a large window overlooking rolling grassland that stretched toward distant mountains. "Feeling better?" Ryder asked, turning to face her. "Yes, thank you," Grace replied, smoothing the unfamiliar dress. "And thank you for the clothes. I'll find a way to repay Mrs. Holloway." "No rush on that. Martha Holloway's been looking for someone to help at her dressmaking shop. Said to tell you there's work if you want it." He motioned for her to sit at the table and placed a bowl of stew in front of her. "Eat now. Everything else can wait." As Grace ate, she studied her rescuer. Ryder Jenkins was not what she'd expected of a rancher in this remote corner of Nevada. His speech was educated, his manners refined despite his rough exterior. His hands were calloused from hard work, but they moved with surprising grace as he cut bread to accompany their meal. "How long have you lived in Yerington?" she asked. "Born and raised here," Ryder replied. "My father started this ranch with 12 cattle and a dream. Now it's one of the more successful operations in the county, though nothing grand by California standards." "And your family?" A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my parents to influenza 5 years back. My younger brother Thomas lives in Carson City now, working for the railroad. It's just me here." He paused. "And my foreman Lewis and his family who live in the smaller house down the path. His wife Maria has been looking after you too, though she's shy with her English." Grace nodded, understanding the unspoken message. There was propriety to consider, even in her desperate circumstances. "I won't impose on your hospitality longer than necessary, Mr. Jenkins. Once I've recovered, I'll find lodging in town." Ryder studied her with those clear blue eyes. "No rush, Mrs. Turner. Recovery takes time, and please call me Ryder. Then you must call me Grace." They shared a small smile, and for the first time since the attack, Grace felt something besides grief and fear, a tiny spark of hope that perhaps all was not lost. Over the next few days, Grace regained her strength. Though Ryder had offered to take her into town immediately, she'd accepted his suggestion to wait until she felt steadier. Each morning, she awoke to find him already gone to his work, the ranch coming to life around her. She spent time with Maria, the foreman's wife, who taught her to make tortillas and spoke in a mixture of Spanish and halting English about life in Nevada. On the 4th day, feeling restless, Grace ventured outside to explore the ranch. The main house sat on a gentle rise overlooking corrals and outbuildings. Beyond them stretched pastureland where cattle grazed, and further still rose the Sierra Nevada mountains, their peaks still capped with snow even in late spring. As she walked toward the largest barn, she heard Ryder's voice floating on the breeze, speaking in low, soothing tones. She found him in a stall with a magnificent black mare, carefully cleaning a cut on the animal's leg. "Good girl, Midnight," he murmured, unaware of Grace's presence. "Almost done now." Grace watched, captivated by the gentleness in his hands and voice. This was a different side to the stoic rancher who'd rescued her, tender, patient, and utterly focused on the creature in his care. When he finally looked up and saw her, surprise flickered across his features before settling into a warm smile. "She stepped in a rabbit hole yesterday," he explained, patting the horse's neck. "Nothing serious, but needs cleaning to prevent infection." "She's beautiful," Grace said, stepping closer but still maintaining a respectful distance from the large animal. "Best cutting horse in Nevada," Ryder said with unmistakable pride. "Been with me since she was a foal." He finished bandaging the leg and straightened up. "Do you ride, Grace?" The question caught her off guard. "I used to, as a girl in Missouri. Nothing fancy, just bareback on my father's plow horse." Ryder's eyes lit with unexpected delight. "Once Midnight's healed up, perhaps you'd like to try again. I have a gentle gelding that would be perfect for a returning rider." The offer stirred something long dormant in Grace's memories of freedom and joy she'd forgotten during her years as a proper city wife. "I'd like that very much." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of a wagon. A middle-aged woman with silver-streaked dark hair called out a greeting as she pulled the team to a halt. "Martha," Ryder acknowledged with a nod. "Wasn't expecting you today." "Thought I'd save you the trip to town," the woman replied, her sharp eyes taking in Grace's appearance. "And meet our newcomer properly." She climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility for her age. "Martha Holloway, dear, glad to see you up and about. Grace Turner, thank you for the clothes, Mrs. Holloway, they've been a godsend. Call me Martha, everyone does, and those old things." "Don't mention it." She waved away Grace's thanks. "I've brought some supplies Ryder requested and a few more things I thought might suit you." She gave Grace an appraising look. "Ryder mentioned you might be interested in helping at my shop." "Yes, indeed," Grace said eagerly. "I'm quite skilled with a needle. My mother taught me dressmaking, and I continue to sew even after my marriage." Martha's expression brightened. "Perfect. I've more orders than I can handle, especially with the miners' wives wanting new things for the Independence Day celebration. Could use an extra pair of hands." As they discussed the possibilities, Ryder excused himself to unload the wagon. Grace watched him work, noting the ease with which he lifted heavy sacks of flour and sugar. There was nothing showy about his strength, it was simply there, reliable as the mountains on the horizon. Later, after Martha had departed with a promise to expect Grace in town the following week, Ryder and Grace sat on the porch watching the sun set. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Martha's a good woman," Ryder said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Lost her husband in a mining accident 12 years ago. Raised 3 sons alone and built that dressmaking business from nothing." "She seems formidable," Grace agreed. "She is that. Also the closest thing to a doctor we have in Yarrington most of the time." He glanced at Grace. "The cut above your eye is healing well. Don't think it'll leave much of a scar." Grace touched the spot absently. In truth, she'd almost forgotten about it, which seemed remarkable considering how her entire life had been upended just days before. "I've been meaning to ask," Ryder said carefully, "if you have family elsewhere who should be notified about what happened." Grace shook her head. "No one. My parents are long gone, no siblings, and my husband's family." She hesitated. "They never approved of me. Thomas came from wealth, old San Francisco money. I was just a shopkeeper's daughter with good manners and a pretty face." "Their loss," Ryder said simply. Grace felt her cheeks warm at his matter-of-fact compliment. "After Thomas died of heart failure, they made it clear I wasn't welcome in their circle anymore. That's why I was heading to Yarrington. A fresh start somewhere no one knew me." "Well, now someone knows you," Ryder said, his gaze steady on the horizon, "and is mighty glad of it." The following Monday, Grace moved into the small apartment above Martha Holloway's dressmaking shop in Yarrington. The 2 rooms were sparsely furnished but clean, and the window overlooked the town's main street. Though the arrangement made sense, she couldn't impose on Ryder's hospitality indefinitely, and living above the shop was convenient for her new employment. Grace was surprised by the pang of regret she felt leaving the ranch. Ryder had brought her to town himself, insisting on carrying her few belongings up the narrow stairs despite Martha's teasing about gentlemanly cowboys. Before departing, he'd awkwardly presented Grace with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Just something I thought you might need," he'd mumbled, refusing to meet her eyes. Inside, Grace had found a beautiful leather-bound journal and a quality fountain pen. On the inside cover, he'd written in a surprisingly elegant hand, "For new beginnings, R.J." Life in Yarrington proved busier than Grace had anticipated. Martha's shop catered to everyone from miners' wives to the more affluent ladies connected to the silver trade. Grace's skilled needlework and eye for fashion quickly earned her a reputation, and she found herself working long hours to keep up with demand. The town itself was a typical Western settlement: dusty streets lined with wooden buildings, a mix of saloons and legitimate businesses, and a social hierarchy as rigid in its way as San Francisco's had been. But there was also a sense of possibility here that Grace found invigorating. No one cared about her past or her husband's family name. They judged her on her work and her character. Ryder visited town regularly, ostensibly for supplies, but he always found time to stop by the shop. Sometimes he brought small gifts: wildflowers from the range elland, fresh eggs from his chickens, once a jar of honey from a beekeeper near his property. Martha observed these visits with knowing eyes but said nothing, at least not to Grace. One evening in early July, as Grace was closing the shop, Ryder appeared at the door. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance. His shirt was crisp, his hair neatly combed, his boots polished. "Evening, Grace," he said, hat in hand. "I was wondering if you might join me for supper at the hotel dining room. They've got a special fried chicken tonight that's supposedly worth the trip." Grace found herself unexpectedly flustered. Was this a social call between friends or something more? Her confusion must have shown on her face because Ryder quickly added, "Just as friends, of course. Nothing improper intended." "I'd be delighted," she said, making a quick decision. "Let me just change my apron and get my shawl." The dining room at the Yarrington Hotel was the closest thing the town had to fine dining. White tablecloths covered the tables, and a small vase of flowers graced each one. The other diners, mostly traveling businessmen, and a few local couples, glanced curiously at Grace and Ryder as they were seated. "Everyone's looking," Grace whispered, feeling self-conscious. Ryder's lips quirked in a half-smile. "That's because you're the prettiest woman in the room," Grace flushed. "Nonsense. It's because you're the most eligible bachelor in the county, according to Martha." "Is that what she says?" Ryder looked genuinely surprised. "I'd have thought my reputation as a confirmed bachelor was well established by now." "And why is that?" Grace asked, suddenly curious. "Why has someone like you never married?" Ryder considered the question while the waiter poured their water. "Never found the right reason, I suppose," he said finally. "Saw too many marriages of convenience that turned bitter. My parents had a rare thing: genuine love and respect. Made me particular, I guess." Throughout the meal, Grace found herself studying Ryder with new eyes. He was different in town, more reserved with others, more formal, but with her there was an easy companionship that felt increasingly precious. His quiet intelligence showed in his observations about the changing economy of Nevada, his compassion in his treatment of the young, nervous waiter who spilled water on their table. As they walked back to the dressmaking shop after dinner, the summer night warm around them, Grace realized with startling clarity that she'd begun to care for Ryder Jenkins as more than just her rescuer or friend. The recognition both thrilled and terrified her. Her marriage to Thomas, while not unhappy, had been a practical arrangement: comfort and security in exchange for being the perfect merchant's wife. What she felt blooming in her heart now was something else entirely. At her door, Ryder hesitated. "There's a town social on Saturday for Independence Day," he said, studying his hat brim as if it contained vital information. "Dancing and such. Would you consider attending with me?" Grace's heart quickened. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that very much." His smile, rare and genuine, transformed his weathered face. "I'll call for you at 7 then." He placed his hat on his head, nodded once, and turned to leave before stopping abruptly. Almost forgot. Midnight's leg is fully healed. That ride I promised you, perhaps Sunday afternoon, if you're not too tired from the festivities. It's a date, Grace said, then blushed at her forward phrasing. But Ryder only smiled wider before walking away into the gathering darkness. The following days passed in a flurry of anticipation and preparation. Martha, upon hearing about Grace's plans, insisted on helping her create a new dress for the occasion. "Can't have you looking anything less than spectacular," the older woman declared, sorting through fabric samples. "Not when half the county will be watching to see if Ryder Jenkins has finally been caught." "It's just a social gathering," Grace protested weakly. "He's being kind to a newcomer." Martha snorted inelegantly. "Child, I've known that man since he was a boy scraping his knees chasing frogs in the creek. He doesn't just do anything." Her expression softened. "He's a good man, Grace. Solid through and through, but lonely, though he'd die before admitting it." Together they created a dress of deep blue cotton, simple in design but perfectly fitted to Grace's slender figure. The color brought out the auburn highlights in her hair and made her gray eyes appear almost silver. When Saturday evening arrived, Grace was ready well before 7, too nervous to sit still. She paced the small apartment, touching her hair, smoothing her skirts, checking her appearance in the small mirror again and again. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at the street door below. Grace descended the stairs, her heart pounding ridiculously. When she opened the door, the look on Ryder's face made every moment of anxiety worthwhile. He stared at her with undisguised admiration, momentarily speechless. "You look beautiful," he said finally, offering his arm. "So do you," Grace replied honestly. Ryder had outdone himself, wearing a formal black suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and height. His normally unruly hair was tamed, and he'd clearly visited the barber for a fresh shave. They walked arm in arm to the town square, where tables had been set up around a cleared area for dancing. Lanterns hung from ropes strung between buildings, casting a warm glow over the gathering. A small band was playing on a hastily constructed platform, and children darted between the adults, their excitement palpable. Grace was introduced to what seemed like half the population of Yerington. Ryder knew everyone, from the elderly station master to the youngest child, and was clearly well respected. Grace observed how differently people behaved with him compared to her first days in town. Then, she'd been an object of curiosity and gossip. Now, as Ryder's companion, she was welcomed warmly into conversations and groups. As the evening progressed and the dancing began, Grace found herself genuinely enjoying the simple pleasure of community celebration. When Ryder led her onto the dance floor for a waltz, his hand warm and steady at her waist, she felt as if she were floating. "You dance well for a rancher," she teased. "My mother's insistence," he replied, guiding her smoothly through a turn. Said no son of hers would embarrass a lady on a dance floor. They moved together as if they'd been partners for years, conversation flowing easily between them. When the music changed to a livelier tune, Ryder surprised her again with his agility. By the time they took a break for refreshments, Grace's cheeks hurt from smiling. The evening's festivities culminated in fireworks, a rare treat for the remote town. As the first colorful bursts illuminated the sky, Ryder gently took Grace's hand in his. They stood like that, fingers entwined, watching the spectacle in companionable silence. Walking home after the celebration, Grace felt a curious mix of elation and melancholy. The night had been magical, unlike anything she'd experienced in her previous life. Yet she couldn't help wondering what it meant, where this connection with Ryder might lead if anywhere at all. At her door, Ryder removed his hat and held it nervously in his hands. "Thank you for coming with me tonight, Grace. I can't remember when I've enjoyed an evening more." "Neither can I," she admitted softly. He hesitated, clearly struggling with what to say next. "About tomorrow, the ride. I thought we might make a day of it, pack a picnic, head up to the lake in the hills. It's pretty there, peaceful." "That sounds wonderful." Another pause, longer this time. Then, with careful deliberation, Ryder leaned forward and placed the gentlest of kisses on Grace's cheek. "Good night, Grace Turner," he whispered, his breath warm against her skin. "Good night, Ryder Jenkins," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. As promised, Ryder arrived the next morning with 2 horses his own Midnight and a gentle chestnut gelding named Cooper. Grace had borrowed riding clothes from Martha, a split skirt that allowed her to ride astride comfortably while maintaining modesty. "Been a while since these old bones sat a horse," Martha had said when lending the clothes, "but they should fit you well enough." She'd winked conspiratorially. "Have a good time, dear. Don't worry about getting back early on my account." The morning was perfect for riding clear skies with a light breeze that carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. As they left the town behind, Grace felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The rhythm of the horse beneath her, the open country stretching before them, the man riding beside her, everything combined to create a sense of freedom she hadn't experienced in years. "You ride well," Ryder observed as they climbed a gentle slope. "Doesn't seem like you've forgotten much." Grace laughed, exhilarated by the simple pleasure of it all. "It's coming back to me, though I suspect Cooper is doing most of the work." They rode higher into the foothills, the landscape changing from sagebrush flats to pine forest. Ryder pointed out landmarks along the way, a rock formation shaped like a sleeping bear, a meadow renowned for its wildflowers, a distant peak where snow remained year-round. The lake, when they reached it, took Grace's breath away. Nestled in a natural bowl surrounded by trees, its waters were crystal clear, reflecting the blue sky and white clouds like a perfect mirror. A small wooden dock extended into the water near a clearing perfect for their picnic. "It's beautiful," Grace said, dismounting with Ryder's assistance. "Does it have a name?" "Locally it's called Mirror Lake," Ryder replied, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "But I've always thought of it as my mother's lake. She loved this place, used to bring us here for picnics when we were boys." There was something deeply touching about Ryder sharing this special place with her. As they spread their blanket and unpacked the food Martha had prepared, Grace felt a growing certainty that this day would mark a turning point in her life. They ate leisurely, talking about everything and nothing: Ryder's plans for his ranch, Grace's childhood in Missouri, books they'd read, dreams they'd harbored. When the conversation turned to the future, Grace found herself speaking with unexpected honesty. "When I first came to Yerington, or tried to, I had no real plan beyond escape," she admitted. "Thomas's death left me adrift. His family made it clear I wasn't welcome in their world without him, and I had nowhere else to go." "And now?" Ryder asked quietly. Grace looked out over the peaceful lake. "Now, I'm beginning to think I might have found exactly where I belong." Ryder's eyes, when she turned back to him, held an intensity that made her breath catch. "I think you might be right about that," he said softly. After their meal, they walked along the shore, gathering interesting stones and watching fish dart in the shallows. When Ryder suddenly stopped and pulled off his boots, Grace looked at him questioningly. "Best swimming hole in Nevada," he explained, rolling up his pant legs. "Too perfect a day not to at least get your feet wet." Grace hesitated only a moment before removing her own boots and stockings. The water was cool but not unpleasant as they waded ankle-deep along the shore. When Ryder playfully splashed her, Grace retaliated, and soon they were laughing like children, their earlier solemnity forgotten. Eventually, they retreated to the blanket to dry off in the afternoon sun. A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched clouds drift overhead. Grace was acutely aware of Ryder beside her, his steady breathing, the clean scent of him, the careful distance he maintained even now. "Grace," he said finally, turning to face her, "there's something I need to say." She met his gaze steadily, though her heart hammered in her chest. "Yes." "I'm not a man given to flowery speeches or grand gestures," he began, his normally confident voice uncertain. "But these past weeks, getting to know you, they've been the best of my life." Grace felt tears spring to her eyes at his simple honesty. "For me as well," she whispered. Encouraged, Ryder continued, "I know it hasn't been long. I know you came here for a fresh start, not to be tied down again, and I'd never want to rush you or pressure you." He took a deep breath. "But I care for you, Grace Turner, more than I thought possible. And if there's any chance you might someday feel the same." Grace didn't let him finish. Following an impulse she didn't want to suppress, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. For a moment, Ryder seemed frozen in surprise. Then his arms came around her, gentle but insistent, drawing her closer as he returned the kiss with restrained passion. When they finally parted, both breathless, Ryder rested his forehead against hers. "I take it that's a yes," he murmured, a smile in his voice. "That's a definite possibility," Grace replied, her own smile matching his. "Though I might need more convincing." Ryder was happy to oblige. They returned to town as the sun was setting, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. At Grace's door, Ryder kissed her again, this time with more confidence but equal tenderness. "I have to go to Carson City tomorrow," he said reluctantly. "Business with the bank that can't be postponed, but I'll be back in 3 days. Will you have dinner with me when I return?" "I'd be disappointed if you didn't ask," Grace replied honestly. Over the weeks that followed, their courtship progressed with the steady certainty of changing seasons. Ryder called on Grace regularly, taking her for rides, bringing her to dinner, occasionally joining her and Martha for evening meals above the shop. Grace visited the ranch on Sundays, sometimes helping Maria with preserving fruits or tending the kitchen garden. The town observed their growing relationship with general approval, though there were inevitable whispers. Some questioned the propriety of Grace's quick attachment after widowhood. Others speculated about Ryder's sudden interest after years of bachelorhood. But these voices were largely drowned out by those who saw the genuine affection between them. By late August, when the rangeland was golden with summer's end, and the first hint of autumn crispness touched the morning air, Grace had integrated fully into Yerington life. Her work at the dressmaking shop had expanded to include teaching a small sewing circle for young girls, and she joined the committee planning the Harvest Festival. Though memories of the stagecoach attack sometimes still woke her in the night, the terror had faded, replaced by gratitude for where that tragedy had ultimately led her. On a perfect Saturday morning, Ryder arrived at the shop earlier than usual, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I thought we might ride out to the canyon today," he said when Grace came downstairs. "Weather's perfect for it." The canyon was a place Grace had heard about but never visited, a dramatic gorge carved by an ancient river, famous for its striking rock formations and views. It was also a full day's ride round trip. "Let me pack some food," she said, already mentally planning what they'd need. "And leave a note for Martha. She's visiting her son today, but I don't want her to worry if she returns before we do." They set out as the town was just coming to life, Ryder unusually quiet as they rode. Grace didn't press him, content to enjoy the journey and the spectacular landscape that unfolded as they traveled farther from town. The canyon, when they reached it around midday, proved every bit as magnificent as Ryder had promised. Towering walls of red and gold stone, twisted juniper trees clinging impossibly to sheer cliffs, eagles soaring in the vast blue sky above. They ate their lunch on a flat rock overlooking the deepest part of the gorge. Afterward, Ryder suggested a short walk to what he called the best view in Nevada. The trail was narrow but well-defined, winding between boulders and along the canyon's rim. When they reached a natural stone platform jutting out over the chasm, Grace gasped at the panorama before them, the canyon spreading like a giant's artwork in all directions, the distant mountains beyond, and the perfect solitude of the moment. "I've never seen anything so beautiful," she said softly. "I have," Ryder replied, his eyes on her rather than the view. Grace turned to find him watching her with such intensity that her breath caught. Before she could speak, he took her hands in his. "Grace," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his face. "When you arrived in Yarrington 4 months ago, you said you had nothing, but the truth is, you brought everything I never knew I was missing." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, and Grace's heart seemed to stop completely. "I love you," Ryder said simply. "I think I've loved you since I found you on that road, though I didn't recognize it then. You're the strongest, kindest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, inside and out." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I know it hasn't been long, and if you need more time, I'll wait as long as it takes. But I can't go another day without asking Grace Turner, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" He opened the box to reveal a ring not ostentatious like the jewelry Thomas's family had favored, but perfect in its simplicity. A single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds in a gold setting. "It was my mother's," Ryder explained. "My father gave it to her when they had nothing but each other and dreams of what they might build together." Tears blurred Grace's vision as she looked from the ring to Ryder's earnest face. In that moment, her past, both the happiness and the sorrow, seemed to fall away, leaving only the present and the future stretching bright before her. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, Ryder Jenkins, I will marry you." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he was on his feet, gathering her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise of their shared tomorrow. They were married on the first day of October, when the aspen trees in the mountains had turned to gold, and the air held the sweet melancholy of summer's end. The ceremony took place at Ryder's ranch, now their ranch, under an archway of autumn flowers that Louis and Maria had constructed beside the house. The entire town of Yarrington seemed to attend, along with Ryder's brother Thomas from Carson City and ranchers from neighboring properties. Martha Holloway, who had become like family to Grace, sat in the front row weeping unashamedly into her handkerchief. Grace wore a gown of ivory silk that she and Martha had worked on secretly for weeks, its simple lines enhanced by exquisite needlework along the bodice and hem. Her hair was adorned with fresh flowers, and the pearl hairpin she'd managed to save during the stagecoach attack her, something old, that now seemed like a talisman that had guided her to this new life. Ryder, standing tall and proud beside the minister, watched with wonder as Grace walked toward him on Louis's arm. In his eyes, Grace saw everything she'd ever wanted but never truly believed she'd find: acceptance, admiration, and a love so deep it transformed them both. Their vows were straightforward but heartfelt, spoken clearly for all to hear. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the assembled guests startled birds from nearby trees. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with tables of food prepared by the women of Yarrington, music provided by local musicians, and dancing under the stars. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the yard, casting a golden glow over the joyful gathering. Late in the evening, as Grace and Ryder danced slowly to a waltz, he leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Are you happy, Mrs. Jenkins?" Grace looked up at her husband, the words still new and wonderful in her mind, and smiled. "Completely," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "Who would have thought that losing everything would lead me to finding everything that matters?" "I knew that first day," Ryder admitted. "When I told you that your life made you wealthy enough for me, I meant it more than I realized." As their guests began to depart, calling good wishes and tossing flower petals, Grace felt a profound sense of having come home at last. The journey that had begun with terror and loss had led her to this moment of perfect contentment. Later, when they were finally alone in the house that was now theirs together, Ryder took Grace's hands in his. "I have something to show you," he said, leading her to what had been his study. Inside, Grace found the room transformed. A beautiful desk sat by the window, topped with her journal and pen. Shelves lined one wall, filled with books. In the corner stood a dress form and sewing table with all the equipment a dressmaker could desire. "I know you enjoy your work with Martha," Ryder said, watching her face anxiously. "And you can continue that as long as you wish. But I thought you might like a space of your own here as well, somewhere to write or sew or simply be alone when you need it." Grace turned to her husband, overcome by the thoughtfulness of his gift. "It's perfect," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "You're perfect." "Far from it," he said with a self-deprecating smile. "But I promise to spend every day trying to deserve you." "You already do," Grace assured him, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "More than you know." In the years that followed, their love only deepened as they built a life together on the ranch outside Yarrington. Grace continued her work with Martha, eventually taking over the shop when the older woman decided to retire and live with her eldest son in Sacramento. But she also developed her own small business creating custom wedding gowns, her reputation spreading throughout Nevada and even into California. Ryder expanded the ranch operations, introducing new breeding stock and innovative farming techniques. Under his careful management, the Jenkins Ranch became known as one of the most progressive and successful in the region. Their first child, a son they named James after Ryder's father, arrived 18 months after their wedding, a sturdy, blue-eyed boy with his mother's auburn hair and his father's determined chin. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Sarah, who from her first breath showed signs of the independence and spirit that would characterize her life. Through the inevitable challenges, droughts that tested the ranch's resources, Grace's difficult second pregnancy, the year when cattlemen and sheep ranchers nearly came to open conflict, they faced everything together, their partnership only strengthened by adversity. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Ryder surprised Grace with a journey back to the canyon where he'd proposed. They left the children with Maria and Louis, who by then had 3 grandchildren of their own and were delighted to have James and Sarah for a few days. The canyon was as beautiful as Grace remembered, perhaps more so with the perspective time had given her. They stood together on the same stone outcropping where Ryder had knelt 5 years earlier. "Any regrets?" Ryder asked, his arm around her waist as they gazed out over the spectacular landscape. Grace leaned into his embrace, thinking of the long journey that had brought her to this place, and this man. She remembered the terrified young widow who'd collapsed on the road to Yarrington with nothing but a torn dress and hidden wedding band. How far she'd come from that desperate moment, how much she'd gained, how much she'd grown. "Not a single one," she replied with absolute certainty. "Everything that happened, even the terrible parts, led me exactly where I needed to be." Ryder turned her gently to face him, his expression serious. "When I found you that day, I thought I was just doing what anyone would do, helping someone in need. I never imagined I was actually finding my future, my heart." He touched her cheek tenderly. "You came with nothing, Grace Jenkins, but you've given me everything." As the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains, painting the canyon walls in fiery hues of orange and gold, Grace stood in her husband's embrace and knew with absolute certainty that this was her true wealth, not possessions or status or security, but this love, this family, this life they'd built together from the ashes of her old one. "We're both wealthy beyond measure," she whispered as Ryder's lips met hers in the fading light. "And I wouldn't trade what we have for all the riches in the world."